Hello! Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of Mildly Interesting. In today's episode, we will talk about Elon Musk buying Twitter, the leaked Roe vs. Wade Supreme Court opinion, and Hong Kong's new leader, John Lee. If you like the stuff that we do, please give us a follow on Spotify or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our website, mildly-interesting.co.uk, and follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram, to get some updates from us. Without further ado, I'm Akash Lush.
And I'm Jean Sanz.
And this is Mildly Interesting.
Mildly interesting. No, seriously, just mildly interesting.
We're starting off today's episode with a bit more business news, a bit more lighthearted. We're going to start off a bit light today by talking about our favorite meme lord billionaire, Elon Musk, who has decided to try and buy out Twitter for $44 billion. Santos, why? Why is this a thing?
I don't know.
Why is this?
I don't know. So his claims are essentially freedom of speech based. So he wants essentially to improve the freedom of speech in Twitter. At least that's what he says, that he wants to sort of like roll back some restrictions. It even said that he would welcome Trump back, which sure, I guess. I don't really know how to take this. It's just a weird piece of news, I guess.
It is an interesting piece of news, especially since Twitter is one of the big social media companies, as well as the fact that it's not a very monetizable one. The only way you can make money off Twitter is like selling its shares. That's the only concrete way of making money off Twitter. But Elon is planning to buy all of the shares and then making the company private. So it's a very strange business move from someone considered one of the leading entrepreneurs of this century.
And how do we feel about social media being owned privately, though?
There are concerns about how impartial Elon Musk is going to be once his takeover of the company is complete. He is going to act as the company's CEO temporarily. From what he's told the press, it seems that he is very keen on trying to make Twitter sort of the Wild West again, where opinions can be shared, and he hasn't completely shared what his plans are. For one, he did mention that he would reverse the ban on Trump's Twitter account, or Trump being on Twitter. But he's also talked about making the algorithm, the sort of formula that picks and chooses what tweets come on your like For You page. He has talked about making the algorithm open source so that it would be available for anyone to look at and for anyone to like tweak, essentially. There isn't much else that he's talked about, sadly. And it even seems like funding his purchase for Twitter has become a precarious topic, because you would think Elon had enough money to complete this buyout, but he's actually taking on investors and loans from banks and other companies. So on Thursday, a SEC filing, so the Security and Exchange Commission, revealed that Musk had got another $7 billion from friends and investors to buy Twitter. So all of these investors were sort of agreed by, like handpicked by Musk. Commitments ranged from $1 billion from Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison to $5 million from Honeycomb Asset Management. It is important to note that Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey was also in talks to back the buy, and Musk is currently sort of negotiating with him about the possibilities of contributing Jack Dorsey's shares to Elon's buyout. It's really weird when you look at the full list of investors and people who support Musk's buyout, because they are from pretty much all walks of life. So other investors include Silicon Valley venture firm Sequoia Capital, crypto exchange company Binance, retirement account management Fidelity, Dubai-based Vi Capital, Sovereign Wealth Fund Qatar Holding, and Prince Al-Walid bin Talal of Saudi Arabia. Not only has Musk gotten money from these handful of investors, he also sold $8.5 billion worth of Tesla shares and has lined up $13 billion in loans from banks and is also borrowing against his Tesla holdings. However, shares in Tesla were down more than 8% with the price sinking more than 15% over the last month. So while many people think that this is sort of a move to defend free speech or whatever, or bring a social media platform into a new age, so to speak, when you look under the fine print or look at what he's doing specifically, it does seem like this is just a bad business move. Not only is the shares in his own company dwindling, but he's gonna go into debt to buy out a company that isn't going to be monetizable. So the current CEO, Agrawal, told employees at a company-wide town hall meeting that the future of Twitter is uncertain under Musk. Once the deal closes, we don't know which direction the platform will go. That's a direct quote from him. Though Musk has said things, he's told investors that he felt Twitter's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization was low, and the company has, quote, too many engineers not doing enough. He's also pledged to make the company a quote-unquote magnet for talent. But what does any of this mean? Like, what do you think? What do you think Musk's big plans for essentially making Twitter profitable is?
I'm not sure. Like you said, he's saying a lot of words, none of which have any real backing, to be honest. And I don't know I honestly don't know what he's doing, because it just feels like a massive everything. It probably isn't, but everything feels like a massive PR stunt. It's like a Dogecoin-like market influence kind of thing, you know what I mean? And I don't know, it just seems like he's trying to like create his own little country inside Twitter. It does seem like there's a bit of some hiccups in paradise for Musk. As he said, the deal is on hold at the moment over some details to do with the rate of fake and spam accounts. Although I don't know how much that affects the deal in the first place. Maybe it affects the amount he's willing to pay, I suppose. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know why the whole deal would be on hold. Because of the rate of spam accounts on Twitter. That just seems like a bit of a weird factoid to me. Well, like, where do you think it's gonna go with Twitter, though?
It's interesting because Musk has talked about reforming the platform, but he's also talked about launching new products for Twitter, new things that you can pay. For example, he has talked about launching a sort of paid subscription to view an ad-free Twitter, which is sort of, I guess, the same business model as YouTube and then YouTube Premium or YouTube Red.
But who's complaining about Twitter ads, though?
That's the thing. That's what I think has not been thought through. When was the last time because YouTube ads they can be annoying. Some of them you can't skip. But with Twitter ads, when was the last time you just didn't scroll past it? Like, when was the last time you were annoyed by a Twitter ad?
Exactly.
There's also the idea that he's going to make corporations and countries pay to use just basic Twitter in the first place. Which is, it's kind of raised this question of, alright, if he's going to levy an entrance fee, who pays it? What counts as a corporation or a company, and what doesn't?
Do we count as a corporation now? Are we going to have to pay for Twitter, Akash?
Yeah, because this is a shared business account. So it does sound like the marketing strategy of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. And it's very uncertain what Twitter will be if this buyout proceeds, but I I'm kind of excited to see, because it might be a good change, it might be a bad change, but one thing's for sure, it's going to be chaos.
It's gonna be a change, that's for sure.
Now, going on from what may be the worst financial decision of someone's career, we're talking about people who would probably make the same decision. It's now time for Idiot of the Week. Santos, who do you have lined up as your Idiot of the Week?
So, the person I've got lined up is a man by the name of John Sedgwick. Have you ever heard of John Sedgwick, Akash?
For some reason, the name rings a bell.
Okay, that's really weird. Okay. So, he was a Union Army general during the American Civil War, who was killed in action while leading his troops. So, how did he die? I can hear you asking between your teeth. Well, he was confident, maybe too confident, that those he was fighting against had bad aim, so he famously said, "Why are you dodging like this? They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance." He was promptly shot in the head and died straight after that.
Oh no.
That's it. That's all he's known for.
That is brilliant. I love that.
What about you, Akash? Who's your idiot this week?
This is a bit more recent. Honestly, I can't believe this happened. And part of me wants to think this is clickbait, but I did some background research and this does seem kind of legit. So I'm going to send you the post that I saw, cuz it's fucking wild. But so, there's this guy called Nico Amalana. He's a British YouTuber. He's most famous for running for Mayor of London and coming in 5th as an independent candidate. However, this isn't about him. Have you heard the name Thomas Robb?
I have watched the video that you're talking about, actually.
Yes, so Thomas Robb is I believe he's an American pastor from Arkansas. He's from a town widely described as the most racist town in America. And he is allegedly a leader of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. And if you guys don't know who the KKK are, they're just some real bad dudes. They're not nice, to put it very, very lightly. Nico has released a video where he tricked Thomas Robb, a leader of the KKK, into doing an interview with him. This was under the pretense that Nico was from the BBC, and he did make some discreet, the other meaning of BBC. He made some discreet BBC jokes at Thomas Robb, and got Thomas Robb to... Man, I don't want to explain the video because I want them to watch it, but essentially, he made Thomas Robb look like a complete fucking clown.
I watched it as it came out. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Honestly, Thomas Robb, you are a moron. He tricks Thomas Robb into saying a bunch of shit. Go check out the video. Thomas Robb may be our idiot of the week, but Nico is our lad. He's our Chad of the week.
He's our Chad of the week. Maybe we should start a segment in his
honor,
in his light. Maybe we should start a segment, the lad of the week. like Rob, you know what he looks like? It looks like my two brain cells fighting each other in exam season. Now we move on from the lighthearted stuff to probably one of the hottest debates of today, and there's abortion rights. So on May the 2nd, Politico, like an online news outlet, published a letter by the Supreme Court, which indicated the Supreme Court was going to revisit and revoke Roe vs. Wade. And for those of you who don't know, Roe vs. Wade is essentially the case that brought to light women's right to abortion through women's right to privacy. Now, Akash, we're not going to go into whether or not we agree or not with abortion rights. I don't think that's called for here. Maybe in one of our deep dives episodes we will talk about it. But why don't you lay the groundwork for what Roe versus Wade actually is?
So, in 1970, an individual under the pseudonym Jane Roe filed a lawsuit against Dallas County District Attorney Henry Wade to challenge a Texas law making abortion illegal except by a doctor's orders to save a woman's life. She alleged the state laws were unconstitutionally vague and abridged her right of personal privacy, protected by the First, Fourth, Fifth, Ninth, and 14th Amendments. So this is where Roe v. Wade comes from, and it went up all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1973, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Roe and stated that access to abortion is in fact a constitutional right. And thus Roe v. Wade from that point on became the ruling that enshrined the idea that abortion is a constitutional right. Not only that, but in 1992, in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the court guaranteed a woman's right to an abortion until the fetus is viable outside the womb, which is typically at about 22 weeks to 24 weeks of gestation. But it's all built upon this 1973 ruling, Roe v. Wade.
So I think it's important to point out, though, that in the 1973 ruling of Roe versus Wade, it's not that abortion became legal, or there were caveats to it. For instance, the court ruled in favor, but saying that the state still had legitimate interest in protecting the health of pregnant women and the quote-unquote potentiality of human life. So after 1973, what happened was that on the first trimester, only women could decide on her own abortion. On the second trimester, the state could impose regulations on the grounds of the woman's health. And in the third trimester, the state can impose restrictions on the grounds of saving the life of a baby or the health of the mother. But it's not like abortion was outright deemed constitutional, and it wasn't the right to abortion per se, it was that abortion was part of the right to privacy. So this is where it's kind of contested, because if you're listening to this and thinking that maybe the right to privacy seems like it doesn't really protect abortion, a lot of people would agree with you. In fact, it's the main reason as to why the Supreme Court is looking to overturn Roe versus Wade in the first place, claiming that abortion is not, quote, deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions. Whatever that means, of course. The law behind the decision has always been contested. So, the court is removing 50 years of legal precedent. Obviously, there are going to be a lot of consequences. So, in case Roe versus Wade is overturned, which is very, very likely to happen, what do you think is going to happen, Akash, to abortion rights as a, debate, almost, and, as a thing in American politics?
So, most analysts agree that if the Supreme Court does strike down Roe v. Wade, the legality of abortion services will be determined on a state-by-state basis. Now, in 16 states and the District of Columbia, access to abortion has already been made a fundamental right by state legislature and courts, so they're not really dependent on the federal protections that it gets. However, it will most likely be tightly restricted or banned in 22 states, with another 4 being expected to move forward with banning abortions. Now, if you have money, and if you have the resources, you could just go to one of these 16 states or the District of Columbia and get an abortion there, if you don't live in a state which outright bans doing that. Texas, for instance, criminalized the act of helping someone getting an abortion. So without the federal protections, that law would criminalize going to one of these states to get an abortion, even if it means saving your life. And it's not only the legality, but it's also the human life cost of repealing this act. So before the ruling in 1950s and 1960s, 200,000 to 1.2 million abortions were performed in unregulated illegal settings due to lack of legal options. So it gives the idea that there is no banning abortions, there's only banning legal abortions. People who desperately need it will search for another option, especially if they come from poor income backgrounds that cannot support a child. In 1965, there were about 200 deaths attributed to illegal abortion. These figures are likely an underrepresentation because obviously the whole thing was illegal. Nonetheless, this constituted 17% of all deaths attributed to childbirth and pregnancy that year. A recent study concluded that banning abortion nationwide would lead to a 21% increase in the number of pregnancy-related deaths overall and a 33% increase among black women specifically. Not only does this target the pregnant population, but it targets those people who come from minority or vulnerable groups, as they are more susceptible to search for abortions, as they may not have what is required to take care of a child properly.
Yeah, so those who will suffer the consequences, as per usual, are those without the means to actually, do something about it. And like you said, states like Texas have or plan to make it illegal to aid and abet to what they consider to be a crime in abortion. However, some states have already said that they will not have extradition to a woman's original state in the case of abortion. So how is this going to end? Well, ironically, this is probably going to end back at the Supreme Court, because it's very likely that the cases that deal with abortion are just going to multiply from now on should Roe versus Wade be overturned. So, my last question for you, Akash, and I don't really know how I stand on this, but do you think that the decision to ban or allow abortion, and by the way, I really hate the whole ban or legalize abortion things, like, we're not talking about drugs, we're talking about something that's much more serious than that, but should it be up for the states, or do you think it should be federal?
I do not see a reason why individual states need their own laws on abortion when all across America it's a very simple idea that women should have choices over their body. Sometimes, let's say you don't want a baby. It could be as easy as telling someone, just use protection. But it's not 100% guaranteed. And thus, there are some cases where no matter how hard you try, you will end up getting pregnant, even if you don't have the means to take care of a child. And if you are banning them from taking the decision of not having this potential child, you are essentially sentencing them and the child that will come out 9 months later to a miserable life, where they will get no support from the people who forced them to have that child. It should be federally protected. I don't really agree with the Roe v. Wade overturn, and even though it's not my choice. That's the issue. Like it doesn't matter what I view abortion on. It's not my choice, and I feel like the ability to have that choice is something that should be a constitutional right.
See, I agree and disagree with you. I do agree that it should be a constitutional right, or even if it isn't a constitutional right, it should just be a right, full stop. I don't necessarily disagree with overturning Roe versus Wade, because the law behind it itself is not straight. The law behind it is very frail, so if it doesn't happen now, and I'm not surprising it's happening in the first place, but if it doesn't happen now, it probably would happen at some point. It's not often that the Supreme Court revisits these kind of cases, but it does happen, and it would likely happen at some point, because the decision is just backed up by real law per se. That said, I do agree with you that the right of abortion should be right, and even if it's not constitutional, it should just be a right, full stop, because there's no real reason not to. And taking apart, the far left and the far right opinions, if you boil it down to the middle, it always boils down to the same question, which is, do you think that a fetus is a baby and therefore a person, and therefore a life, or do you think it isn't? That's what the question boils down to. And, stick around. Maybe we will do a deep dive episode on that very question, where we sort of give our opinions on that very question, and therefore on abortion. But for now, I think we both agree that abortion should be a right. I think we just disagree on whether or not Roe versus Wade should or should not be overturned. So the leak of the document has sparked a lot of controversy on where exactly did the leak come from. There's a lot of conspiracy theories coming from that. And on that note, it is now time for my personal favorite segment on this show, which is the conspiracy of the week. Akash, what's your week's conspiracy this time?
So, are you ready for this?
I am ready for this.
This is a conspiracy theory, but it's also more so a direct accusation. All right. So this was
okay.
This was a general. The article that I brought up was from 2018.
Are you about to defame someone?
Yes. Right. So this guy's name, Hassan Firuzabadi, right? Badass name. He also badass name, senior military advisor to Iran's leader, right? So,
okay.
you're probably wondering, what's the biggest threat that he had to face? Was it domestic rebellions? Was it foreign influences? It was chameleons. Are you ready for this?
Okay.
So,
yeah, okay, yeah.
So he accused Western spies of using lizards with the ability to attract atomic waves to spy on Iran's nuclear program. So he had told local media he became aware of the special reptiles several years ago, and referred to one case involving foreigners who were in the Islamic Republic on an aid mission. They possessed lizards and chameleons whose skin attracted atomic waves. He said, adding that the foreigners were, quote-unquote, nuclear spies. So, senior military advisor accused chameleons of spying on their nuclear program, right? My favorite part was how the article sort of finished, how it worded this. So, Hassan Firuzabadi said that Western spy agencies had failed every time, suggesting that the lizards were not successful in their mission. These...
Wow.
Yeah, so not only were these lizards nuclear spies, they were unsuccessful nuclear spies.
They have to be searching for it, man. There's no way.
This was 2018, so it was only about 4 years ago-ish.
You kind of think you wouldn't be surprised by anything at this point. We've already talked about the frogs being gay. And now we've got chameleons that draw in atomic waves, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
These poor aid workers just on a mission to deliver food to impoverished villages, and then they're suddenly picked up, and one of the top military officials is like, "You got a pet chameleon? My God, they're spying on us."
Can you imagine the people that are close to that guy? He's just he just comes home one day, right? And he's like, guys, I've got you won't believe this. Takes a chameleon out of his back. So this is a spy. And they're like, Go on, keep going.
So that's so good. What's what conspiracy theory do you bring to the table today, Santos?
See, I thought my conspiracy theory was very good until I heard yours. I feel mine is a bit lackluster, but have you ever heard of chemtrails?
Remind me again what those are.
Okay, well, I will remind you by asking you a question. Have you ever looked at the sky and saw a plane, leave behind white trails?
Yes, I have.
Cool. So, 99 scientists out of 99 scientists would say that those are condensation trails, called contrails. So these are cloud-like tracks that dissipate quickly. But to some conspiracy theorists, these condensation trails are much more than that. They are chemtrails, which essentially is a conspiracy theory that holds that the condensation trails are actually chemicals that scientists and governments are seeding into the atmosphere. Why? Well, I don't know. Pick your poison, I suppose. Just because they can. And, this feels like a conspiracy theory, obviously. This feels like something that no one would ever believe in. But, believe it or not, there's some history behind these kind of things. For instance, have you ever heard of the project MK Ultra?
No, I have not.
So, MK Ultra, in the 1900s, was a project by the CIA that they essentially were testing a lot of stuff. It was during the Cold War, so they were testing a lot of stuff, trying to, strike fear into the USSR and whatnot. So the CIA reportedly gave large amounts of LSD to unwilling participants, and including via the air. So they were essentially making cities LSD dependent, reportedly. This is actually documented studies.
Oh.
So if this is true, who knows, in 50 years we might just hear about, Ryanair spreading chemicals on the air.
Bro, that's already a thing. That I bum the conspiracy theories. Ryanair is bad for the planet, and I will not think otherwise.
Do you think Ryanair is making us LSD dependent as well?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. More, you could tell me Ryanair was feeding us opiums discreetly, and I'd believe it.
Okay.
From government conspiracies to governments you kind of wish were just a conspiracy, we now move on to Hong Kong's new leader, pro-Beijing hardliner John Lee. Now, I know when I say Hong Kong's new leader, we've already lost quite a few people due to the confusion of whether Hong Kong is its own entity or whether it's a part of China. So I think, like with every article about Hong Kong elections, we have to start from the very beginning. Hong Kong was a colony of Britain, and while mainland China went through a drawn-out civil war that resulted in the rise of a communist government, Hong Kong was under British rule and protection, veering more towards a democratic government. However, due to the complicated treaties of previous wars over opium, Hong Kong eventually had to be handed back to China. But Britain only did this under a handover agreement. This is what set up the complicated yet kind of straightforward system known as one country, two systems. Hong Kong's leader is known as the Chief Executive, and while the campaigning looks a lot like any mayoral elections, the voting was just done by 1,200 people. These people were on something called an election committee. So the system was actually designed so China's favored candidate prevailed, but it was sometimes very close. Even though citizens can't directly elect their chief executive, they could still directly vote for local council members, with some elected district councillors being a part of the election committee and the legislative council. Citizens could also directly vote for members of the legislative council. So you can see that while it's a confusing system, it was a sort of balance between China's want to rule Hong Kong and the Hong Kong people's desire to express their democratic right. However, what changed was in June 2019, Carrie Lam's government, the former chief executive, introduced a bill that would allow the extradition of fugitives to mainland China. Critics worried Beijing could use this bill to prosecute people for political reasons, as many pro-democratic Chinese voices often came to Hong Kong for protection and to hide from communist prosecution. Now, there were violent anti-government protests that rocked Hong Kong for months, and in November, the pro-democratic politicians won a landslide victory in the district council elections. The opposition was expected to build on that result in the LegCo elections. Beijing quickly caught up to this and in response implemented changes to Hong Kong's governing bodies. So, the election committee was expanded from 1,200 to 1,500 members. However, some members were given vetting powers to ensure only patriots who respect the Communist Party can run for office. More than 1/3 of the now 1,500 members will be hand-picked by Beijing groups, and directly elected district councillors have been dropped out of the election committee completely. In the professional sectors, there will be more voting by businesses as a whole instead of individuals, and specifically those businesses with ties to the Chinese mainland where they have business prospects. Obviously, this will make them more pro-Beijing votes. There were also changes to the city's legislative council. While it was expanded from 70 to 90 members, the number of members who were directly elected was reduced from 35, which was at the time half, to just 20 members. The district councillor seats were also dropped, and the election committee itself now appoints 40 members itself. So that is how we got to this point, where John Lee, the former security chief, who oversaw the crackdown on Hong Kong's 2019 protests and oversaw the introduction of the national security law with low popular vote, became the city's next chief executive. Santos, how do we think John Lee is going to run Hong Kong? From what we've seen, what are his objectives, and possibly what do you think Beijing is going to ask him to do?
I just want to start this off by saying that a lot of countries at least try to mask their non-democratic election. A lot of the countries trying to make it, 80%, 70, high 70%. No, this was just an election for 99% of the vote. They wasn't even trying to hide it, which is, it's mind-boggling to me how this can even happen in the first place. But as to what to expect now, you're probably going to expect much more influence of China in Hong Kong. That's almost a given. Given his allegiance, it's very likely also that you're going to see an even more increased crackdown on political dissidents. And just, overall sympathy towards Beijing. You're going to see probably a much tighter restrictions to do with protests, for instance. Perhaps more crackdown on the already very tight social media. Like you said, this guy was responsible for essentially national security, right? So he knows his way around this kind of stuff. He knows what he has to do, and it's essentially a puppet government is what it is. It's what it seems to me anyway.
Many analysts say his appointment as the only candidate Beijing backed for the elections, his candidacy was proof that Beijing's priorities is simply law and order above all. And even though he will assume office on July 1st, there have already been crackdowns. In the days following his selection, several individuals, including 90-year-old retired bishop Joseph Zen, were arrested for running a fund in 2019 to provide legal assistance to detained protesters on suspicion that they broke the national security law. 3 of the others were former legislator Margaret Ng, pro-democracy activist Dennis Ho, and academic Dr. Hui Po Kung. And before we go on, we're gonna probably wrap up this story soon. But before we go on, can we just how much of a villain do you have to be to arrest a 90-year-old retired bishop for what? For what? Giving legal assistance to those in jail. How?
Someone called James Bond. We've got the next villain.
So that's, like you said, normally people hide up how non-democratic their votes are, but this is just pure meme. This is just bully shit. You can see why John Lee doesn't have popular support. And thus, it will be very much the case where he will have to depend on Beijing for his political position. In December last year, pro-democracy media organization Strand News was raided by the police and its senior staff arrested, with none other but John Lee's full support. Numerous other independent news outlets have also closed in Hong Kong since. He has pledged to strengthen governance and tackle the chronic housing problems while also promoting business and investments back into the city. How he's going to do this, how he's going to tackle public dissent as well as business interests is going to be very interesting, because the reason Hong Kong has always been a financial hub is because it's been such a free and fair place, a beacon of democracy right next to China. And while China is the factory of the world, recent events have made it clear that it is not the most, for lack of a better word, democratic place on earth. And so the reason Hong Kong was such an attraction for businesses and financial investors was because it was close to the moneymaker, the market of the world, China, but it still offered the same sort of freedom you would expect from a democratic country. So how John Lee is going to execute Beijing interest in securing Hong Kong, but also attracting Western investors, we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I just want to point out before we close this out, I think these elections have a even wider consequences on China-Taiwan relations, because it feels to me anyway that China is just trying to control bit by bit whatever it can, and because there were, you know, there are some relations between Taiwan and Hong Kong. For instance, there were talks between Joshua Wong with the government in Taiwan to discuss the potential for Hong Kong protesters to seek political asylum. For instance, that was following the 2019 protests. So there are some clear, ties between the two. So I do believe that on that side of the story, that China probably thinks that if it controls Hong Kong, it will eventually also lead to an even bigger control or bigger pressure on Taiwan. So that is very possible that we might see that happening over the next few years.
And that concludes another episode of our podcast. As always, we hope that you were mildly interested. If you like the stuff we do, give us a follow on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our articles and other episodes on our website, mildly-interesting.co.uk. Give us a follow on social media. Me and Santos post up sometimes just about the wacky hijinks that come with making this podcast. We're on Twitter and Instagram. But without further ado, I've been Akash Lush.
And I was Sean Sant.
And this has been Mildly Interesting.
Mildly interesting. No, seriously, just mildly interesting.